Call it the brewery versus big labor. The head of our nation's oldest brewery, D.G. Yingling and Son, is pushing his state of Pennsylvania to pass a right-to-work law. It would rein in the power of the unions, and he says doing so would attract more businesses to the area and create more jobs. So, Michelle, we know you're a beer lover. What do you think of this idea? Let's make Pennsylvania right to work.
I think every state ought to be a right-to-work state. Look, employees and workers should be able to work wherever they want without having to join a union. Why should a worker have to go and pay dues to a union, and then that union takes that money to support candidates and campaigns that they may or may not support? From 2005 to 2011, big labor spent $4.4 billion in political spending. Why not allow the American worker to keep that money rather than having to give it to a union that then spends it on campaigns that they may or may not support?
All right, this is a tough one to defend, Ebony. What do you think? Is it time to make the country a right-to-work country?
I don't think that we need to go that broad, Eric, but I do see Michelle's point, and I don't like that concept of taking union dues and supporting candidates sometimes involuntarily. But I do think unions do good things. I do think there's something to be said for collective bargaining and someone advocating for, work conditions and things like that. So again, I think it should be up to individual states on this one.
Let me go to you, Jonathan. The gentleman
who it didn't help the longshoremen.
Hold on.
Didn't help the General Motors workers.
The grandson of Yingling says, how many times do you have to be taxed on the same dollar? He makes a very good point.
Well, and then they leave. That's why states like Kansas and Iowa, North Dakota, Oklahoma all have unemployment rates either at 5% or below, Eric. They're all right-to-work states. Right to work is just implicit in the right to life. To Michelle's point, the right to choose a job and not be forced to pay union dues, and also as an employer, the right to hire whomever you think's in your best interest. We often talk about unions as simply parasites, and this is the best example of how they really are.
And Wayne, another good example is this company says they're going to open their next brewery probably in a right-to-work state, and that wouldn't be Pennsylvania unless they get the move that they're looking for.
Well, that makes sense, obviously, to a private corporation to have a right-to-work state. We know that, for example, from 1998 to 2008, Texas gained over 1 million jobs. Ohio lost 10,000. Texas was a right-to-work state. Ohio was not. But all of this occurred, in the Depression in 1933, and they had a closed shop where the union could coerce you to force you to pay union dues, regardless of whether you were a member of the union or not. And they could control your job. You were working for the union. You weren't working for the employer. And that changed in the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, rightfully so. But there was a period of time there when people actually thought this was fair.
Right.
Where that comes from, I haven't the vaguest idea.
Okay, so Ebony, earlier you'd said, unions do good things. Can you help me out? What exactly do they do?
Like I said, they can help people in terms of advocating for, because some people can't do that on their own, Eric, and that's the thing. In a perfect world, people could go to their employer and say, look, these work conditions are crappy, you need to do something or we're going to strike. But some people can't. They need a collective effort, and that's something that unions can serve.
Michelle, do they need a collective effort?
I think an individual would it's actually better to have an individual bargain on their behalf and for their specific needs. Look, I think that right to work is pro-freedom and it's pro-worker, and collective bargaining, it's not pro-freedom. It's not good. Allow the individual to speak on their behalf.
The thing that makes this work is competition. Not in other words, if there's a competitive atmosphere for the economic way out there, then jobs are going to be determined by that competition. And therefore, I don't need necessarily the union to protect me from that. I have to have a competitive state where I can know where I could go out and work for a certain amount of money, and that job will be open for a certain amount of people to a certain amount of time. That's all.
John?
Yeah, and I just disagree with this notion that unions have been some great beneficiary. I mean, ask the textile workers, ask the longshoremen, the steel workers, GM workers, none of them have been helped by any of those union efforts. And again, I just think it comes back to that idea of individual rights, and what role does a union have in deciding where someone can work or who an employer can hire?
Well, you make a very good point, Jonathan. Look what the unions, the UAW, did in Detroit, in the state of Michigan. They literally drove the auto industry down south to right-to-work states. Ebony, why won't that happen with beer, or as Jonathan points out, textiles, or every other industry?
No, I can't say that it won't, Eric. In full disclosure, I think, the idea of what unions, if properly used, could do could be effective. But the way in which they've been kind of overly broad and overstepping bounds and been very aggressive with companies and corporations is effective.
And the whole point is, it's not just that they advocate for individuals, but that they use the power of government to pass laws that violates people's right to trade.
Yes.
It's not that they advocate for folks, of
Yeah,
course,
but they do that.
pass
They
those
do
laws
that
and use
because
them.
We'll leave it there. We'll
They
leave it
do
there.
that
It's a
because
heated
a
topic.
politician, because they can deliver votes. That's why they
Well,
do
no,
it.
no,
Because they
you're
can
100%
deliver
right,
votes.
Wayne. We know why they do it. We're just not sure if it's really pro-business, and we are all pro-business on this show. Thanks to Michelle Fields and Ebony K. Williams for joining us this week. Coming